Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Constitutional Foundations 3. This lecture will be in several parts. Also, all of the readings and the entirety of the assignment of Constitutional Foundations 3 is related to the issue of federalism. My lecture, the McClellan reading, will be background material for the idea and the concept of federalism. The Wilson reading and some of the other documents that are going to be provided will give you more of a contemporary view of federalism and its application in 21st century American politics. The PowerPoint will be part of that as well, and my lecture will generally follow the PowerPoint. Okay, let's talk about American federalism. Back in the dark, misty recesses of history, in 1979, I was a freshman at Western Carolina University, taking my first class in American politics. The issue of federalism was, in that textbook, a very minor issue, not a central issue. Federalism was going through a period of being de-emphasized. Again, what makes it so exciting is it comes and it goes in American politics. And I remember the textbook, Cummings and Wise, which was one of the most popular textbooks, sort of the Wilson text of its day. And in that textbook, there was very little information on federalism. Federalism was sort of, as I mentioned in the PowerPoint slides, sort of like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in terms of popular culture. No one follows them today. Very few people do. If you know people that have rooms full of Mutant Ninja Turtle memorabilia, that says perhaps a lot about those folks and about their interests. It was sort of like during the same period of time, the boombox, the large battery-powered apparatus that played 8-tracks, played cassettes, AM/FM radio. That was the way to really jam. Those things are gone. You might be able to find them in an antique store at the Smithsonian, but they're gone from American life. That was sort of the view of federalism. All federal in 1979, all issues have been resolved. Well, that was wrong. And what's so great about that being wrong is that it shows us the vitality and the importance of federalism as a concept and an aspect of American politics. It never goes away. In our lecture today, we want to look at 6 aspects of federalism. First, what is it? What is federalism? 2, what role do the founders have for this federated republic? How is federalism supposed to work in the eyes of the founders? Number 3, what are the pros and cons? Let's look at both sides of the argument of the role of federalism. Those that are in favor of it and those that are against. 4, let's look at federalism in flux. How federalism has changed over time. And how the ideas and the understanding of federalism has changed. 5, let's look at the relationship between the federal government and the national government. How does it work? How do they interact, which is very important. 6, let's look at the future of federalism. What might a class taking this survey of American government in 2020 or 2030 think about, or what about federalism, and what might the federal or federated system of the United States look like? Okay, what is federalism? Number 1. What are we to make of federalism? Almost every country in the world has some kind of federalism, whether it's a top-down totalitarian government like North Korea or the People's Republic of China, or very diffused countries like Switzerland that has 25 cantons, or we think of them as states, and each state is essentially independent. They speak various languages in each one of those cantons. Well, one way to think about it is it about relationships, the relationship between the different parts of the government. The famous American historian, and I'm reluctant to quote historians, but the famous American historian Forrest McDonald, you know my joke already in this class, the history is a dead subject, suggested that we invented it, others imitate it, and it no longer exists in America. And I think that's a little bit cynical, even though McDonald is a great scholar. Federalism exists. It's very prominent. and it's still a key aspect of American politics and American political life. It's how the national government and state governments set out their authority and how they use that authority. Well, what is it? Let's read some textbook definitions. I'm going to first give you the old school definition. Federalism, as I mentioned, I've already shown my cards in this case, is about relationships. It's about political units with various parts. So in the United States, you have national government in Washington, you have 50 state governments. That would be the case in any kind of federated republic. The federal system of government is one in which political authority is divided between a general or national government and regional or state governments. The classic statement about federalism in the Constitution is in the 10th Amendment, which I would like to read. It is de-emphasized among the original 10 amendments, which we call the Bill of Rights, but it's still there. It still helps define that relationship. Powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The 9th Amendment is also a statement of federalism in many ways. I give a new school definition in the PowerPoints that are intended for your amusement, but it shows an example of how perhaps some contemporary students think of federalism. Okay, let's look at the founders' ideas. This often dictates many interpretations, both from the Supreme Court, the Congress, the President. What did the founders think? What are their views? Because they're the ones who created the system. They're the ones whose views we should consult first. Well, it was an old idea. They didn't create it. It's not something that was handed down to them from a tablet from the heavens. It's an idea that has been around from very early on, beginning of time, at least the beginning of politics. Aristotle, the great Greek political philosopher, a student of Plato's, when he wrote his book, The Politics, he studied 158 constitutions, and some of those that he liked best had ways of dividing power that he thought would promote the survival of the country, or the polis, a very small country. And so you have this notion of divided power, even in the ancient world, in ancient Greece, the cradle of democracy. In fact, in many ways, Aristotle argued that in the natural organization of politics, from the family to the community to the state, that political power should most likely be carried out in those places closest to the authority. For example, most issues should be solved on the local or community level. Well, in the medieval period, which is usually misunderstood as a period where the church controlled everything, actually it was a wild, exciting period in terms of intellectual inquiry, particularly the later Middle Ages. But also their ideas of politics. The Pope wasn't dictating activities everywhere. Obviously, the Pope had tremendous influence in the medieval period, various popes. But the medieval idea, particularly even in Roman Catholic social thought, was a fancy term, what we call subsidiarity. Subsidiarity. Now, there's a word that you can win friends with and influence a lot of folks, but just throwing it out, whatever the topic. Hey, let me talk to you about subsidiarity. Well, of course I'm joking, but the concept does have a great deal of importance. Subsidiarity means government should have its place where actions are decided closest to the source of that need and that action. Therefore, power should be diffused, and the community should be the one making many of those decisions, not the state as a whole. So the idea of subsidiarity is power at the government action should take place at the lowest possible level. Many of the great students of politics have thought that power should be diffused, that power should not be in the hands of one authority, especially when we talk federalism about a national government. the great French philosopher Baron de Montesquieu, in his book The Laws, talks about dividing the branches of government, the elements of government, the judiciary, the executive, the legislative. You can't put it all in one part. So in a sense, he has an idea that's conducive to legislation, to federalism. John Locke, the great English political thinker who will have a lot of influence on the American founders, probably overrated generally speaking, but influential nevertheless. Locke makes a similar argument, is that power needs to be divided. I would also bring in the example of another great British political thinker that would be very influential in America, and that's Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke, who wrote in opposition to the French Revolution and in favor of independence for the colonies, suggested that centralized, unchecked power always led to the abrogation of human liberty. That liberty, the ability to do what we want, the ability to make our own choices, was best nurtured in an environment where individuals could play a role in the decision making of the government, basically at the local or state levels. Okay, it's an old idea. The American political tradition, in many ways, was one of state authority, state power. Look back at the Declaration of Independence that we've already looked at this semester. Look at the Articles of Confederation. Article number 2, each state retains its sovereignty. Wow, that's a classic statement of federalism. The Constitution itself, and we mentioned the 9th and 10th Amendments, very strong defenders of a limited role of the national government based upon delegated power from the states to the national government. On the other hand, tremendous opportunity for state power, and that state power would house most of the power of the government. But this is a dispute that, from the very beginning, has captivated most discussions of American politics. Most disputes in American politics come down to federalism in one way or another. Even in our first president, President George Washington's administration, there was the dispute, the famous, often cited, fascinating dispute between Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, advocate of state power, on the other hand, Alexander Hamilton, who was Secretary of Treasury, and Jefferson would be Secretary of State. Hamilton arguing for a strong national government, strong national government being the arbiter of economic growth, the exertion of national power. So where the power of American government should naturally reside, in the states or the national government, has been a topic of discussion and dispute from the very beginning of American politics. Well, there have always been strong advocates on behalf of state power. Now, we usually talk about the Federalists, Madison, Hamilton, Washington, but there's an equally important dissenting tradition that we call the Anti-Federalists, who at the time of the Constitutional Convention and before and after the event, who argued on behalf of state power. And that the states were the natural and appropriate building blocks. Anything else would limit the liberty of American citizens, provide for a government that was further removed from the people, and a government that would ultimately fail. At the end of the day, the founders came up with what Wilson, I think, very appropriately in the text calls a new plan, brand new, never envisioned before, one that was based upon the desire to guarantee liberty. Also one where there would be a happy level of disagreement between the national and state governments. Tension, disagreement, perhaps. And that idea of shared power, what we call American federalism, would be an example of power from the people, that it would be not based upon any idea that the American founders had ever seen or encountered before, but their own insights in large part, and that state power would be a hallmark against the national government getting too much authority. And that's in large part the impetus of the 9th and 10th Amendments. Constitution also, based upon these federalism principles, allows for a great deal of economic exchange, for various interests to dispute and to work with each other. So while you have this long tradition of state authority on one hand, the Constitution also supports national power. The Necessary and Proper Clause, Article 1, General Welfare Clause, has allowed the national government to make decisions based upon the concept of general welfare, even though that's not defined at all in the Constitution itself. And in fact, in the 21st century, we can almost argue that anything is falls under general welfare. So there is a shift in policy. Over time, that shift in policy has tended to help the federal government gain power over the states. In our next lecture, we'll begin to look at the types of federalism and the arguments for and against it.